The African Union, the 36th Ordinary Summit of the African Union. Founded in 1963 as the Organization of African Unity, the African Union is founded on the core values of freedom, equality, justice, and dignity of the African peoples. Since the wave of independence that swept through the African continent in the early 1960s, its leaders sought a future forged in unity and a shared Pan-African identity. The current stature of the organization came as a result of its visionaries. While those like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Nasser of Egypt were the most progressive of the group who sought to forge unity immediately, they met the kiss of death by the 1970s through a series of coups d'etats and political assassinations.
A huge crowd cheers as Kwame Nkrumah leaves.
The Gradualist group emerged as the de facto group with the likes of Senghor of Senegal and Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. At the time of its inception, the OAU had 32 heads of independent states who signed the charter in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, that would establish Africa's first continent-wide institution. The OAU would later be changed into the African Union, which officially launched in 2002. It currently has 55 member states. As compared to the OAU, the African Union has clearly articulated objectives, albeit lofty, which is envisaged in Article 3 of its charter. The Constitutive Act. The comprehensive continent-wide objectives are as follows: achieve greater unity and solidarity between African countries and the peoples of Africa, defend the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of its member states, accelerate the political and socio-economic integration of the continent, promote and defend African common positions on issues of interest to the continent and its peoples, encourage international cooperation, taking due account of the Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, promote peace, security, and stability on the continent, promote democratic principles and institutions, popular participation and good governance, promote and protect human and people's rights in accordance with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other relevant human rights instruments, establish the necessary conditions which enable the continent to play its rightful role in the global economy and in international negotiations, promote sustainable development at the economic, social, and cultural levels, as well as the integration of African economies, promote cooperation in all fields of human activity to raise the living standards of the African peoples, coordinate and harmonize policies between the existing and future regional economic communities for the gradual attainment of the objectives of the Union, advance the development of the continent by promoting research in fields, in particular in science and technology, and work with relevant international partners in the eradication of preventable diseases and the promotion of good health on the continent. These 14 provisions encompass values for nation and state building and the institutionalization of progressive ideals among states, and amplify the continent's presence and say on the global stage. This year, the African Union hosted the 36th Ordinary Summit amidst monumental global developments like the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a recalibration of global systems after the COVID-19 pandemic, and multiple conflicts on the continent, including Ethiopia, the seat of the African Union. This year's summit has the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCTA, as a centerpiece, with a mandate of creating a single continental market and eliminating barriers to trade on the continent. The AFCTA aims to transform Africa into a global powerhouse. The AFCTA, with 55 participating countries and 8 regional economic communities, is the world's largest free trade area, with $3.4 trillion combined GDP and encompassing 1.3 billion people. Although the AFCTA groundwork has been gradually laid out in prior years, this year's summit indicates that African leaders seek to capitalize on the continent's immense economic potential to drive continental integration. This year's summit is conducted with the looming danger of a full-blown international conflict, which could be signaling a shift in the global balance of power. Since the onset of the Russia-Ukraine war, Africa has been in the spotlight as one of Russia's largest trading partners. The United States and the European Union take a particular interest in curbing Russian influence in the global south, particularly its economic relations with African states, as a means to finance its war in Ukraine. United States Secretary General Antony Blinken's visit to South Africa in August of 2022 aimed to promote this cause. The South African development community, SADC, however, has objected to America's Countering Malign Russian Activities in Africa Act, adopted by the House of Representatives, claiming that it aims to dictate foreign policy measures with little regard to the interests of member states. Thus far, the African Union, following in its tradition of non-aligned movement, has reiterated its insistence on dialogue for the peaceful resolution of the conflict in Ukraine. During his opening statement on the 36th African Union Summit, Moussa Faki Mahamat, outgoing chairperson of the Union, outlined some of the continent's prevailing challenges: geopolitical and intercommunity conflicts, economic financing, rising inflation, and energy crisis are among the crises that affect the collective sovereignty of African countries. According to the chairperson, sanctions imposed on certain nations, though procedurally correct, have adversely affected the populations of the regimes targeted. He added that it is equally important to revisit internal hurdles to domestic constitutional reforms, which he called Système de résistance contre la réforme constitutionnelle, to stir nations toward effective and progressive reforms. It is crucial that the internal constitutional systems of member states resemble the process outlined by the Union's charter. Given the summit's current theme, the rise in economic protectionism among African states poses a challenge to the outlined vision of an economically integrated Africa. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia took the podium for an opening remark, stating, "Excellencies, when I stood before you last year, in this same occasion, Ethiopia was just coming out of a costly conflict. This time, I am here to celebrate the signing on November 2nd, 2022, of the Pretoria Peace Accord between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF, which has led to the silencing of the guns. Ethiopia is where it is today, in no small part because of the tireless efforts of the African Union and the wisdom of its deeply held creed, in the principle of African solutions for African problems." The Prime Minister lauds the Union for progressing toward the silencing of the guns and the fruitful labor for those directly involved. The Prime Minister noted the problem of continental food security despite the vast agricultural potential as the continent with the world's remaining uncultivated arable land. The Prime Minister remarked, "We need to critically assess why 1/3 of the hungry people in the world are in our continent." Prime Minister Abiy lauded Ethiopia's own efforts at food sustainability through various rural and urban food production initiatives. Relatedly, the problem of climate change poses a significant threat to Africa, which, according to the Prime Minister, disproportionately affects Africans. He noted, "Climate change is an African problem, but its roots lie elsewhere," citing the need for climate justice, that is, the need for common but differentiated responsibilities. Ahmed Abu Ghati, Secretary General of the League of Arab States, also took the opportunity to call for increased cooperation in economic, political, and diplomatic relations between African and Arab states. He also took the opportunity to announce the Afro-Arab Summit that is to take place in Saudi Arabia on November 15th. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, made a hearty appeal about the economic inequities severely affecting the continent, stating, "The global financial system routinely denies developing countries debt relief and refinancing while charging extortionist interest rates, adversely affecting the continent's prospects in attracting investments, competitiveness in the global market, and job creation for the continent's youth. Africa needs change," according to the Secretary General, "as it is rich in resource but not in global support." He also called for a new belt architecture to radically transform African financial institutions. Finally, the summit concluded with the assumption of the chairmanship of the African Union for the year of 2023 by His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of Comoros.